So we're rolling? Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is John Gurda, and I work as a Milwaukee historian and have done that for a very long time. And I spend a lot of time around books, both reading them and writing them. And I'm here this evening for Arts at Large, which does a wonderful job of introducing art to Milwaukee's future, who are our school children, especially Milwaukee Public Schools, but not just them. And with the coronavirus shutdown, they have had to cancel workshops, artist residencies, and 170 something hours of direct contact. So the kids are suffering for it, and part-time employees as well. Arts at Large are suffering as well. So it's important that the Arts at Large, important to them to get out and make sure they're still keeping touch, with their audience and the people who use their services. So I'm one of a number of people who once a week are going to be reading stories to all of you, and not just kids. No, this is for grown-ups as well. And my story this evening is Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And this is one of my favorite books. And I don't mean favorite kids book. This is one of my favorite books. I read this to our kids when they were small. We have 3 of them who now have kids of their own. And this was written by Ron and Judy Barrett back in 1978. So the book is older than some of our kids, but it's a classic and certainly has held up well. And what I think of when I read this book is climate change. So they had a rather different view of climate change. So Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. Hope you can all see this well. We were all sitting around the big kitchen table. It was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for juice. Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we each could eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. So you don't need to know this, but her name is Kate, and her brother's name is Henry. So watch Grandpa do the flipping, and then watch the dog down here, and then watch the cat and see what happens. Oh no, they end up, the cat chases after the dog, it makes Grandpa trip, and he throws a pancake way high in the air. So seconds later, something flew through the air and headed toward the kitchen ceiling. It's a pancake. And look what happened. And landed right on Henry. So Kate's a little surprised, and Henry's really surprised. After we realized that the flying object was only a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. And look, even the cat and the dog are helping themselves to some of the pancakes. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall-tale bedtime story he'd ever told. Across one ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, lay the tiny town of Chewn Swallow. So look what's happening here. So Grandpa's telling the story, and the pictures are all in black and white. And look what happens. All of a sudden, the story is in color. And here's the town of Chewn Swallow. In most ways, it was very much like other tiny towns. It had a main street lined with stores, houses with trees and gardens around them, a schoolhouse, about 300 people, and assorted cats and dogs. So you have, here's the movie theater, and what they're showing is dinner at 8 and duck soup. So everything's about food here. And who does that look like? Who does that older man look like? Looks like Grandpa. So he's part of the story. But there were no food stores in the town of Chewn Swallow. They didn't need me. The sky supplied all the food they could possibly want. The only thing different about Chewn Swallow was the weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and at dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. So here's this, he's looking up for the sky, and look at the dog. The dog is looking up at the sky too. So look what happens. Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. But it never rained rain, it never snowed snow, and it never blew just wind. It rained things like soup and juice, it snowed mashed potatoes and green peas, and sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. So look at the hamburgers kind of blowing into the town. Catch one of those, your catcher's glove. So here's the grandpa man kind of going out in the morning, and look, he has a spoon, a knife, and a fork in his closet. So the people could watch the weather report on the television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. And here's the weather forecaster, and you see the map here? He's saying it's going to be cloudy with a chance of meatballs. I love this page. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates, cups, glasses, forks, spoons, knives, and napkins with them. That way they would always be prepared for any kind of weather. If there were leftovers, and there usually were, the people took them home and put them in their refrigerators in case they got hungry between meals. So here's a cab driver, and the pancakes are coming down. Here's a boy who's got a whole umbrella full of orange juice, and Spike the dog is eating it. And here's a lady who's trying to catch a chicken drumstick from the sky. And my favorite one, here they are playing a baseball game, but the game, it says, is called on account of pie. That never happened to the Milwaukee Brewers. So the menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side-up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down for the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards. And look at the squirrels in the tree. One almost gets knocked off, and one gets a fried egg on his head. And here this man is waking up after all the food's coming down. For lunch one day, frankfurters already in their rolls blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby. Then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished the meal. And see what this restaurant is? It is Ralph's Roofless Restaurant. No cover, no minimum, always open. So it doesn't even have a roof. Here this man's trying real hard to catch a hot dog. Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times, with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by gradual clearing with a wonderful jello setting in the west. See the jello here? And look at this, the poor deer got a baked potato stuck to his antler. And these are the sanitation workers, the garbage men for Chewn Swallow. The Sanitation Department of Chewn Swallow had a rather unusual job for a sanitation department. It had to remove the food that fell on the houses and sidewalks and lawns. The workers cleaned things up after every meal and fed all the dogs and cats. Then they emptied some of it into the surrounding oceans for the fish and the turtles and the whales. The rest of the food was put back into the earth so that the soil would be richer for the people's flower gardens. That's called compost. And look how they're cleaning up. They have a fork and a spoon and a Tupperware container. You have to take all the food away. And some of you can read this. This is the Chew & Swallow Digest. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worse. And this is the Chew & Swallow Digest. And it says, spaghetti ties up town. And look at this. They're all drowning in noodles. Traffic snarled on Lower Intestine Street. Record-breaking pasta fall causes chaos. And look what happens to the poor people here. One day, there was nothing but Gorgonzola cheese all day. Gorgonzola cheese doesn't smell very good. The next day, there was only broccoli, all overcooked. Here they are trying to have a nice dinner, and all they had is broccoli. And the next day, there were Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. You know, look at this. Poor Floyd's trying to have a birthday party here, and all they have is Brussels sprouts and peanut butter with mayonnaise. Another day, there was a pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. So there's even a fish and a duck. So that got really hard. Now, look what happens. One day there was a big storm. The food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. One Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long and into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye and whole wheat toast. Most of it was larger than they had ever seen before and seen bread and rolls before. It was a terrible day. Everyone had to stay indoors. Roofs were damaged, and the Sanitation Department was beside itself. The mess took the workers 4 days to clean up, and the sea was full of floating rolls. So the birds trying to peck at it to help the people out. People piled up as much bread as they could in their backyards. The birds pecked at it a bit, but it just stayed there and got staler and staler. But you'll see how they're going to use this bread pretty soon. So this poor boy, he's trying to go to the ocean to swim, and all he sees is a whole tide of rolls and bread. And here's a disaster. There was a storm of pancakes one morning and a downpour of maple syrup that nearly flooded the town. A huge pancake covered the school. No one could get it off because of its weight, so they had to close the school. So a helicopter couldn't move it, a tow truck couldn't move it, and here's a news reporter telling the story. And it looks like some of the kids are not that unhappy about school being closed. And here we are doing the same thing, but not because of pancakes. Having kind of a germ timeout. Lunch one day brought 15-inch drifts of cream cheese and jelly sandwiches. Everyone ate themselves sick, and the day ended with a stomachache. Look at all those drifts of sandwiches. Here's another one of my favorite drawings. There was an awful salt and pepper wind accompanied by an even worse tomato tornado. People were sneezing themselves silly and running to avoid the tomatoes. The whole town was a mess. There were seeds and pulp everywhere. Tomato tornado picked up a guy who was taking a bath, a lady who was sitting reading a book, and a sailor in a rowboat. It was a powerful tomato tornado. And now things are getting even worse. The Sanitation Department gave up. The job was too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs. Stores were boarded up, and there was no more school for the children. So hamburgers are landing on the roof. Look at the size of those donuts. Bigger than tractor tires. So a decision was made to abandon the town of Chewn Swallow. It was a matter of survival. Look at this, a pickle crashes through that lady's roof, and their French fries pile up. It's like big trees falling. And I told you they were going to use the bread. Look what they do. The people glued together the giant pieces of stale bread sandwich style with peanut butter. So some pretty good builders here. They took the absolute necessities with them, and they set sail on their rafts for a new land. And look at the sailboat here. See what the sails are made of? They're made of pizza and Swiss cheese. And here comes, they better leave soon, because here comes a whole thunderstorm of submarine sandwiches. And now the ending gets happy. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well. well enough for them to build temporary houses for themselves out of it. So here they, instead of sandwiches, they made houses. Now the story is winding down. Henry and Kate are getting very tired. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change they had to make was getting used to buying food at a supermarket. They found it odd that the food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes, cans, and bottles. Meat that had to be cooked was kept in refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky except rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs. No one ever got hit by a hamburger again. And nobody dared to go back to Chewn Swallow to find out what had happened. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake until the very end of Grandpa's story. I remember his goodnight kiss. Here's the next morning. The next morning, we woke to see snow falling outside our window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it a little faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. There's Grandpa way at the top of the sled hill. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top, and we could almost smell mashed potatoes. The end. So thank you for listening. And there's a sequel to this book, which means a follower to this book called Pickles to Pittsburgh. And it shows them going back to Chewn Swallow and doing some of the things that you kind of wonder, what happened with that town. So thank you very much for listening. And thank you, Arts at Large, for making this opportunity available to all the families. And we'll see you again.